Good morning. This is Jason Dean back at it again for another installment of Film Fanatic Live here on the old YouTube channel. Hope everyone's doing good. And think I always love to give a shout out and a thanks to new folks that come on board and support this channel and that seem to have a the same fandom around all things horror. I'm really excited about these series of videos. I haven't done a full coverage of a franchise in a long time. I've been, I usually try to keep the shows pretty loose. I try to mix things up. I don't really plan so far ahead. I used to, when I was doing videos, when I first started doing videos and it was on through Facebook Live, I would usually put a lot of planning into each show, and I would usually pick a movie, sometimes 5 days to a week out, and then I would usually actually take notes and have every time I would go and actually do the show, I'd have a whole list of notes and things that I wanted to talk about around the film. It was pretty formal. And then I used to, when I would do the Facebook Live videos, I would usually do a little bit of promotion around for the upcoming show. And it was a lot of fun, and I loved doing things that way. It was also the first time I ever kind of ventured into doing video. But the main reason I kind of switched from doing it that way to doing it just now on my, as far as videos go, and about 98% of just the things that I do now around Film Fanatic are all around this YouTube channel. The reason I switched is because I feel like the quality control wasn't very good, and I feel like with doing the YouTube videos, there's a lot more leeway and flexibility. If a video doesn't come out very well, you can just redo it, or you can edit the videos, and it just gives you a lot more leeway. And there's with the Facebook Live thing, you're live and you're out there, and it's great in a lot of ways because when I was doing it, I found that I was instantly reaching a lot of people. But if things went wrong, or I stumbled somewhere, or there were some technical things that were happening, especially the technical things, and especially when it came to where I was doing interview segments, it would just not it would be kind of terrible, and I couldn't really redo things or stop in the middle of of those shows. So I love doing it this way because it's just a lot easier, and it's if something goes wrong, I can just redo it or edit things or whatnot. So, and the other thing that I like about it, or I love about this format, is the quality is actually better. I think the quality of the audio, the video, and everything is better, and hopefully people think the same. And I've totally changed the way I do the videos too. I don't really plan things out way in advance. I do a video every day, I try to. Sometimes, things get in the way and I can't really do. Every now and then there's a video where I can't really upload because I might have shot a video in the morning, but I might have too many things going on, so I don't have the time to record, or to upload them and do all those things around that. It takes, usually when I record a video, I try to do lengthier videos. Some of them are pretty short, but for the most part, they're at least 40 minutes and up. Sometimes they're an hour, and then usually takes, an hour, 30 minutes or so, 30 minutes to an hour to upload the video. And then I usually do all of the text things around it, tagging the video and giving a little synopsis around the video and a description. And then it takes quite a bit of time to find a good photo or a thumbnail photo. I have to search around for something that looks cool or somewhat appealing that might grab the person's attention. Whether and then sometimes I'll use a lot of the times I try to use the actual like poster of that particular movie. I always find that that's really cool. But then the other tricky thing is to find the right formatted photo because a lot of the times they're just too small. So I try to get the larger ones of those because they're a little bit more eye catching and they look more enticing. And then when I can't find like a movie poster kind of a photo, then what I'll end up trying to do is I'll find maybe a photo from the movie or a photo of a scene in a movie that is engaging or looks cool, and then I got to do the same thing, and then so I upload it that way. And then once the video is done, once I finally find the photo that I want to use for the thumbnail, then I upload it to my Facebook page, my personal page, but then I also put it on my Film Fanatic Facebook page. And then when I upload it to that, I usually have to write a little bit of a description about it, and then tag a bunch of things along with that post, and that takes some time. So it takes me, I don't know, it takes me maybe an hour or two every day. The actual video, doing the video itself is pretty easy, but I do it every day. But now the format's really different because I don't really plan. I try to keep things a little more loose. I don't take notes per se. I decide usually maybe within a few minutes of actually shooting the video what movie I want to do. So I try to keep it a little bit more loose, and I don't know. I find it a little bit more interesting that way, and hopefully folks enjoy that. I've had a lot of cool suggestions from people since I've been doing the videos of things that they feel that they really like, and then some things I could probably improve on. So that's always great to hear. But today and then yesterday I started because this is a coverage of a franchise, a full franchise and I haven't done a franchise series in a long time, and I kind of feel, being such a fan of horror films, I feel personally kind of obligated to do this because I look at this whole thing, this whole channel, as just being like a personal diary and a reflection on what these movies mean to me, movies I love, how they inspire me from on a pure entertainment perspective, but then how there's also a deeper thing for that these movies mean to me, and a more of a personal thing, and also it is a tremendous source of inspiration for me creatively, especially when it comes to my band Quantum. Films are the biggest inspiration for my band Quantum, so it's a real part of my life. It's an integral part. So I look at this whole thing as being kind of an experiment, but just a diary of kind of how my weird brain works. And, so I started a series yesterday on the Dracula series that Hammer Productions, the famous British studio that put out a whole ton of movies through the 50s, 60s, 70s, starring the iconic Christopher Lee. And Hammer itself is a massive company. They have put out many kinds of movies. I did a film about 2 days ago called The Kill List, which is a more modern movie that came out in the early 2000-ish time period. Just a fabulous horror movie, one of the most underrated movies. And that was a more recent Hammer release, and that got me interested in thinking of like, oh, I really need to do this and cover these Christopher Lee movies because these movies were such a part of my youth. I just started watching all of them again, and I'm watching all of them, so I decided to do a series on all the Dracula movies. Hammer has a pretty extensive track record of films, tons of movies, and they ventured into doing most of the Universal monsters. You know, the Wolfman, Dracula, the Mummy, even the Invisible Man, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and a few other films that are a little bit different than that. But primarily, they've always released horror films, and they're always, you know, they're known for their, you know, over the top kind of theatrical presentation, and they're pretty cheesy in their own way. They're really schlocky. There's usually copious amounts of blood. There's always a little bit of a sleazy, sexy factor to it with the babes that are in all of the movies. Just amazing. And when it comes to Hammer, my favorite series of films is by far the Dracula films, starring Christopher Lee, one of my favorite horror icon actors of all time. So I started the series yesterday, so I'm really excited. So I'm in the thick of it right now with all things Hammer. So super excited to be doing this. So the second video today that I'm doing in this whole series, and they're all, I'm not doing these videos necessarily in past videos that I've done for Film Fanatic where I've covered franchises. I've I've done them all pretty much in order for the most part of when they were released. I'm not really doing, I'm kind of doing that, but I'm not really sticking to that. I'm kind of doing it because there's so many. I'm doing a little bit more of at a random kind of a thing. Some will fall in the actual chronological order, but I'm keeping it pretty loose and a little bit more random. But I'm covering all the Dracula films. So today's show is the Horror of Dracula. I started watching this last night and just about finished it. And the thing that I've seen all of these movies. Like again, they were a part of my childhood. They're kind of part of my DNA. You know, I was raised on these films. These were the first films that I saw that where I saw Dracula for the first time on the big screen. I used to watch these on cable and during a time of VHS when I was a little kid. These were movies that I would always rent. And I was obsessed with these movies. I've seen all of these movies I don't know how many times. So when I started watching the Horror of Dracula last night, it's just such an awesome revisiting these movies and re-experiencing them because it's mostly out of like nostalgic reasons, but it just totally brings me back to my childhood. But then it's also just they're just so fun and entertaining and campy and silly, and you know I think they hold up. I think they're legitimately pretty scary. I think Christopher Lee is truly menacing on the big screen. I mean his presence on the big screen is unlike anything else. Just amazing. And so it's always such a fun and exciting journey to revisit these movies. And again, like I've said, I've seen all of these movies, you know, probably hundreds of times altogether. And the only thing that I'm always disappointed by is I don't have more of them on Blu-ray. I have all pretty much all of the Hammer films that they've done, including you know, all of the other films that they did that were not part of the Dracula series, starring Christopher Lee. Christopher Lee also starred in other Hammer films where he did not play Dracula, but this whole series is going to be just the Dracula films. I only own, I think, like two or three of the Dracula films on Blu-ray. Unfortunately, it's just one of those things. I keep looking for them, and I come across some here and there, and eventually I'll buy all of them. But as of now, and for actually for a very long time, I've owned all of them on DVD, and they're all pretty good, solid DVD copies. Some movies I have, some of the Hammer movies I have numerous copies of them, but this edition here, I have about 3 editions of Horror of Dracula. This is the best one I have. This is a you know, the entire movie. I have a version of this also, which is on a combo pack, which is good, but the quality of this one is actually better. So eventually, I will get all of these on Blu-ray, but I do have like one or two. And this one is pretty old school. This one came out in 1958. Um, and of course, it stars the iconic Christopher Lee, the one and only. Peter Cushing, amazing. Another icon in the world of horror. Peter Cushing also had a very long history with Hammer Studios. He was virtually in every Hammer Studios movie. Just amazing. One of the greatest British actors. Famously, he was also in the Star Wars films. Um, just another icon. And again, like Christopher Lee, I feel like you know uh, you know to a degree, both of those guys were more or less typecasted as being horror actors, but they had such an amazing career, and they were so prolific at one point, and they've become household names. They also did other things that were outside of maybe like what you would call like genre specific films, but for the most part, they were known for their roles as being, they were horror based actors. But the legacy that Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee that they've left behind is in their track record is epic. I mean, just incredible. Um, but I do think that their actual them as actual actors, the depths and the level or the depth that they each had as an actor was, I feel, to a degree, maybe ignored, but not really admired as much as it should as they should have been. I feel like they could have done anything, even straight up like melodramas. I feel like or comedies, not non horror genre films. I feel like these guys had those abilities where they were truly great actors, even though they were more or less in or known for just one genre. But just amazing. I feel like Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee really had they really had like an immense depth to their talents. But again, just amazing. And Peter Cushing is in also. He was also in virtually every Hammer Dracula film. I mean, it's wild. Janina Faye was also in this film. Carol Marsh, Valerie Gaunt, and Michael Gough, who played Alfred in the Tim Burton Batman, which I always forget. That was the first movie I ever saw with him as a kid. But he was actually in a few Hammer movies, and he's like wicked young. I think he's like in his 20s when he was in this film. And this came out in 1958. It's just wild. And this was directed by Terence Fisher, who was the Hammer Studios worked with many, many different directors over the years. Um, but he was probably the most prolific in that period with Hammer Studios. He was one of the first directors to bring like gothic horror alive in full color with all of these like sexual overtones and explicit horror in films. While mild, by today's modern horror standards, he he was one of those directors that kind of pushed the envelope. And considering the decades that he was really prolific in, the 50s and 60s and 70s, so all of the gothic aesthetics that were used in a lot of these films, and especially this one, but then the sexual overtones, they definitely, I still think that these films hold up so well, even in 2023. But he definitely, as a director, pushed the envelope in in regards to sexuality and violence. Really really ahead of his time. I mean, and the track record of all of the films he did is just unbelievable. The Curse of Frankenstein in 1967, and then also The Horror of Dracula in 1958, Prince of Dracula, Prince of Darkness, 1966, The Revenge of Frankenstein in 1958, and I believe the sequel to this movie, The Brides of Dracula, in 1960, and Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed in 1969. Just so many movies that he did. It's just crazy. I have I have Scars of Dracula on Blu-ray, and there's a really awesome interview with him on it. That's super interesting. The Mummy, he did a version of The Mummy for Hammer Studios in 1959. The Hound of the Baskervilles, The Devil Rides Out, which is a really infamous horror exploitation movie. The Gorgon, so many great movies. He passed away in 1980, but the legacy that he had, definitely the most prolific. Like again, I said, like the Hammer Studios worked with many different directors, but Terence Fisher had the longest working relationship with them, and probably for the most part made the best quality movies, especially when it came to the monster movies and with the Dracula franchise. But yeah, this movie is just so awesome. Like anything, you always, in a franchise, because there's a lot of movies that obviously that entails. There's always there's going to be your favorites in the franchise, and I do definitely have some in the franchise that are my favorite. I really really love the the Satanic Rites of Dracula. That's one of my favorites. Dracula AD, I think, is just amazing. Yeah, just an amazing movie. And then probably my favorite is Dracula Has Risen from His Grave. That's the show I did yesterday to kind of kick this whole thing off. And again, there's so many, and I'm really excited about getting to each one of these movies, and also more or less watching them in order again and back to back. So it's really this is a real exciting kind of thing for me to do. But as a whole, I think all of the movies are awesome. I don't think there's one stinker in the bunch. Probably the most bizarre one, the one that's the most kind of strange and pretty out there, I would say, is the Satanic Rites of Dracula. I really love that movie. That movie's pretty bonkers, and I'm really excited about watching that again, and also watching it in this context where I'm like immersing myself in all the Hammer films. So I'm really looking forward to that. So if you're not familiar with anything Hammer, then with the Hammer Studios, then you gotta get with the program, because if you're a fan of horror, especially gothic horror, these movies are just amazing. Some of the best horror films ever made by one of the most one of the greatest studios ever in history when it comes to horror films. Just amazing. So yeah, The Horror of Dracula. Got to check this out. So stay tuned. There's going to be more videos coming your way dealing with the glorious subject of Dracula, and especially Christopher Lee. So thanks again for checking out these videos, and we will see you next time. Peace.